Russland setzt im Kampf um Bachmut verstärkt Luftlandetruppen ein. Entsprechende Berichte interpretieren deutsche Medien so, dass Russland damit auf seine letzten Reserven zurückgreife. Was sagen Sie zu dieser Interpretation? Weswegen setzt Russland bei Bachmut nun auf seine Luftlandetruppen?
Russia is deploying more airborne forces in the battle for Bakhmut. German media interpret these reports that Russia is drawing on its last reserves. What do you think of this interpretation? Why is Russia now relying on its airborne forces in Bakhmut?
Well, Russia's always relied on forces other than Wagner in the battle for Bakhmut. They've said from the very beginning that the north and southern flanks of Wagner have been manned by Russian forces, including airborne forces, and that Wagner has been receiving fire support from the Russian Federation forces, including airborne forces. So this is nothing new. What may be happening is that the Ukrainians have, I think nobody's denied that the fighting for Bakhmut is very difficult, that the Ukrainians have been pouring reinforcements in, and that one of the goals of these reinforcements were to attack or threaten Wagner on the flank in an effort to cause Wagner to cease its successful offensive operations in the center of Bachmut. So to secure the flanks, the Russians have turned to their regular forces, including their airborne forces, which of course are highly capable, highly trained forces. There's no reason for Russia not to use them. Russia's been using them all along. And they've been very successful in blunting Ukraine's limited counter attacks and using artillery fire to disrupt Ukrainian defenses. So this is not a deviation from what's been going on. I think everybody understands that as the battle develops along the entirety of the line of contact, that Russia will be committing more and more of the forces it has been accumulating since the beginning of the partial mobilization last September. It's not indicative of Russian failure. In fact, it's indicative of Russian success.
Themenwechsel. Anfang der Woche durchquerte ein US-Kriegsschiff die Straße von Taiwan. Nun gibt es Medienberichte, wonach die USA Taiwan massiv mit Harpoon-Antischiffsraketen beliefern werden. Zu welchem Zweck befeuern die USA die Eskalation mit China? Gibt es einen Zusammenhang mit der wachsenden Zahl an US-Beratern in Taiwan?
Change of topics. Earlier this week, a U.S. warship crossed the Taiwan Strait. Now there are media reports that the USA will massively supply Taiwan with Harpoon anti-ship missiles. For what purpose is the USA fueling the escalation with China? Is there a connection with the growing number of U.S. advisors in Taiwan?
I think everything's interconnected when it comes to U.S. Military posture towards Taiwan. First and foremost, I think there's a linkage that has been made between Russia's success in Ukraine and perceptions that China will feed off of the success and therefore threaten Taiwan. This is based upon sheer ignorance. There is zero connectivity between Russia's actions in Ukraine and China's posture vis-a-vis Taiwan. The fact that these are linked shows the insecurity of the West in terms of its declining position in global affairs today. The need to offset a defeat. And we saw this in Europe, where NATO in the United States suffered a humiliating defeat in Afghanistan, and therefore felt it necessary to puff up their chest in Ukraine. And now they're paying the consequences of this action, and therefore, in order to be not to be perceived as totally weak and useless, they're puffing up their chest in Taiwan. It's a dangerous game because China has said that one of their red lines is, of course, any activity on the part of the United States or its allies to be seen as promoting the independence of Taiwan and, again, building up the Taiwanese military. At the same time, you're talking about increasing the sovereignty of Taiwan, could push China over the edge. But let's just deal with reality. As the West has learned with Ukraine, it doesn't matter how much weaponry you pour into a bad situation, you're not going to reverse the inevitability of the fact that it's a bad situation. Now, Ukraine was never going to win this conflict. Russia was always going to win this conflict. Western military aid only prolonged the conflict and increased the cost to Ukraine. Taiwan would never be able to defeat China, ever. And sending U.S. troops over to train the Taiwanese military and providing the Taiwanese military with hundreds of Harpoon missiles will only increase the cost that will be paid by Taiwan if China were to ever go to war. The good news is that China doesn't want to go to war with Taiwan, and I don't think we'll fall into this trap.
Im Inland schüren die USA eine antichinesische Stimmung. Nach medialen Kampagnen gegen Huawei und TikTok suchen US-Behörden nun nach geheimen chinesischen Polizeirevieren und Spionagezentren, so zum Beispiel in Manhattan, Chinatown. Welcher Plan steckt dahinter? Wird die US-Bevölkerung auf einen Krieg gegen China eingestimmt?
Domestically, the USA is stirring up anti-Chinese sentiment. After media campaigns against Hawaii and TikTok, U.S. authorities are now searching for secret Chinese police stations and spy centers in Manhattan's Chinatown, for example. What is the plan behind this? Is the U.S. population being aligned for a war against China?
No, it's an age-old tactic that the United States has used throughout its history, especially dealing with foreigners. We tend to demonize them. And we create a scare, whether it be a red scare for communism, Russophobia, or in the current case, we're trying to get the American people to fear everything Chinese. And the idea is to condition the American public to fear China and then dumb them down to make them ignorant about the reality of China. Because ignorance is, of course, the breeding ground of fear. You're afraid of that which you don't understand. And then this further conditions the American public to accept at face value anything negative said about China. So if every single moment of the day you are, it's pounded in your head that China's a threat, 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 and it just goes on. Sooner or later, the American public, because of their ignorance about China, will just say, yes, China is a threat. And that is a prerequisite for getting the people to go along with any potential conflict down the road. It's unfortunate that it's happening. I can't speak to the veracity of the claims regarding, spy stations and things of that nature. I will say that the idea that the United States is innocent in these matters is absurd. I think every nation should know that the United States is the leader in aggressive intelligence collection activities around the world, especially against targets like China. And so oftentimes what happens is that we mirror image onto ourselves Chinese actions that actually reflect what we're doing in China. We live in a real world, and intelligence operations take place. I'm not going to pretend that China isn't undertaking intelligence collection operations. Yeah, they'd be fools if they weren't, given the threatening posture of the United States. It's in China's interest to know everything they can about the United States, as it's America's interest to protect itself from Chinese intrusion. So, there is this going on, but rational actors need to understand that you have to control this. because if it's allowed to spin out of control, you end up with a war. One of the main goals of intelligence collection is to gather information that allows policymakers to be informed about the true nature of relationships so that they can formulate sound policy. But if you allow the intelligence mechanisms instead to be hijacked by those who seek to create fear to generate support for a conflict, that's the antithesis of sound policy. War is not sound policy. And I think the direction the United States is heading right now is towards a conflict with China. And what we're seeing is the preparation of the battlefield, so to speak, the citizen battlefield for any future conflict.
Die deutsche Außenministerin Annalena Baerbock spielte in Peking den Lehrmeister und drohte, wir würden eine militärische Eskalation in Taiwan nicht hinnehmen. Wenige Tage zuvor war Frankreichs Präsident Emmanuel Macron in Peking und betonte in meisterhafter Diplomatie, Europa müsse seine Abhängigkeit von den USA verringern. Woher kommen diese Unterschiede zwischen Deutschland und Frankreich auf dem internationalen Parkett?
German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock played teacher in Beijing and threatened we would not accept military escalation in Taiwan. Just a few days earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron was in Beijing and in masterful diplomacy stressed out that Europe must reduce its dependence on the USA. Where do these differences between Germany and France on the international stage come from?
Well, I mean, we know that Germany is a compliant tool of American foreign policy. I mean, after all, it allows a $12 billion piece of critical energy infrastructure to be attacked and destroyed by the United States, and they do nothing. So it only follows that Germany would be the attack dog that the United States sends to China to try and clean up the mess made by Emmanuel Macron. You know, Macron is not perfect, but he has for some time now been articulating the need for European independence from the United States. He's been speaking about that for some time, since the end of the Obama administration, when Trump came in, and now continuing, because I think there's a growing reality that Europe is paying a heavy price for allowing itself to be sucked into conflicts that serve America's interests, but not European interests. And we see this in Ukraine, a growing recognition of the debacle that Ukraine is. But Germany is unable to liberate itself from the imperial hand of America. And so your foreign minister goes to China and just proves how utterly irrelevant Germany is. I can't imagine Germany being. I mean, how is Germany planning on impacting a potential Chinese-Taiwanese conflict with its immense military? Is the German Navy going to sail there? The German Army going to suddenly drive across all of Europe and Asia and show up and threaten China? The massive German economy is shutting down as we speak. It's going to suddenly mobilize and undermine China's global presence. Germany's going to take control of global supply chains. Germany is a pathetic little nation that has nothing, brings nothing to the table. Now, it could have brought moral authority to the table. It could have reinforced Emmanuel Macron's statements and brought a moral relevance to Europe. But that's not the role that Germany plays today. Germany is little more than America's attack poodle, than America's six on China. And one only has to look at how China is responding with indifference, because Germany doesn't matter. Germany is irrelevant. Your foreign minister is irrelevant. And unless Germany wakes up to the fact that its future must be defined by German interests, not American interests, it will be seen as little more than an extension of the United States. And given the fact that America's global posture is on the decline, that means Germany will go down the sinkhole with us.
Schauen wir auf die US-Grenze zu Mexiko. Während US-Behörden neue Rekordzahlen an illegalen Einwanderern von Mexiko aus verzeichnen, fordern republikanische Hardliner rund um Ex-Präsident Donald Trump eine militärische Intervention in Mexiko, um dieses und auch das Problem des Drogenschmuggels in den Griff zu bekommen. Wie bewerten Sie das Vorhaben? Ist so ein Militäreinsatz eine realistische Option?
Let's look at the U.S. border with Mexico. While U.S. authorities are reporting new record numbers of illegal immigrants from Mexico, Republican hardliners around former President Donald Trump are calling for military intervention in Mexico to get this and also the problem of drug smuggling under control. How do you evaluate this plan? Is such a military intervention a realistic option?
Well, I mean, the one thing America has shown over the years is our propensity to invade other nations. So, I don't think we can say that it's out of the question. It should be out of the question. The United States shouldn't be in the business of invading its neighbors, shouldn't be in the business of invading anybody. But the sad fact is the only thing America has left anymore is its military. We no longer have diplomatic clout. Our economic clout is faltering. So we're left with the military. That's all we can do is threaten people. Now, this doesn't diminish the fact that America has a crisis on its southern border. That crisis will only be exacerbated by military intervention, the chaos that will be accrued. If we think going into Mexico would be an easy task, we obviously haven't studied history. One only needs to take a look at America's previous military incursions into Mexico in the last century to understand that it's a quagmire from which we would never be able to fully extricate ourselves. The solution to the drug problem and the border problem is good policy and good diplomacy, with America being a good neighbor. The war on drugs has not worked. In fact, I think one can make case that the more the United States declares war on drugs, the more powerful the cartels in Mexico become. And the United States probably needs to look at alternative means of dealing with its drug problem that focus on not just supply, but demand. One of the easiest ways to reduce supply is to reduce demand or reduce the way that demand is done. Now, I'm not advocating a specific policy. I'm just saying that that's common sense. The important thing to note here is that war is not the answer. It's not even close to being the answer. And it should be the last thing. It shouldn't be on the table at all. That the United States should be seeking every possible option short of war to resolve this problem, which means that it's time that these Republican senators who are advocating conflict stop doing so and instead turn to the hard task of how do we change the way we interface with Mexico economically, diplomatically, so as to reduce the pressures on the border regarding immigration and reduce the power and influence of the cartels. Going to war with Mexico will only make these issues far worse, and will probably engender some very serious domestic problems here at home as well. We have a significant Mexican-American population, and I just can't believe that they will be indifferent to an American military invasion of their motherland and where family and relatives live. If you want to find a way to tear America apart, going into Mexico might be the way to do it.
Mexikos Präsident Andrés Manuel López Obrador hat deutlich gemacht, sein Land sei keine US-Kolonie und werde sich einem unautorisierten Einsatz von US-Militär widersetzen. Außenpolitisch bewegt sich Mexiko unter López Obrador sukzessive von den USA weg und in Richtung BRICS. Verstecken sich hinter den militärischen Plänen der Republikaner geopolitische Interessen? Würden die USA einen Krieg mit Mexiko in Kauf nehmen?
Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has made it clear that his country is not a U.S. colony and will oppose any unauthorized deployment of U.S. military forces. In terms of foreign policy, Mexico, under López Obrador, is gradually moving away from the USA and toward the BRICS. Are geopolitical interests hidden behind the Republicans' military plans? Would the USA really start a war with Mexico for that?
Well, we did start a war with Iraq based upon the lie of weapons of mass destruction. So one could imagine that we could start a war with Mexico based upon any spin we decided to put on it. Again, it's a sad commentary that the United States chooses to go for the gun when there are other options out there. Ask yourself, why is Mexico gravitating away from us? Because you can't compel friendship. I mean, what kind of friend am I if I put a shotgun to your head and say, you must be my friend or I'll pull the trigger? The friendship is that you want to be my friend, that there's something attractive about our relationship that says, hey, that's something I want to continue, I want to sustain. The fact that Mexico is moving away says there's something repulsive about the United States. And I think the United States should look into why we're repulsing Mexico. And I think the answer is obvious, because we have been treating Mexico as a colony, as an adjunct of the American economy. We make certain assumptions about how Mexico will behave. We don't address some of the fundamental issues that impact Mexico, such as migration, such as drugs, such as energy. And we take the Mexican economy for granted in terms of our trade relations. And so at some point in time, the accumulated impact of all this bad policy is such that Mexico says that it's in their better interest to gravitate away from America than trying to repair relations with America. How can you repair relations with a nation that doesn't even give you the time of day? The United States has indicated that there's a problem with fentanyl coming over the border. And so the Mexicans sent their entire drug negotiating team to Washington, D.C. to have a meeting to discuss this. They were met with one individual who barely gave them the time of day. That means the United States isn't interested in the Mexican position. They only want to dictate the American position. They expect the Mexicans to accept that at face value. Mexico's tired of playing that game, so Mexico's walking away. The United States can ill afford to have Mexico walk away. There are a lot of consequences to that are undesirable, and so these Republican senators and congressmen, rather than saying, what is it about us that needs to change to make us more attractive to Mexico, to bring Mexico back? It's how do we punish Mexico for being upset about who we are? And that's only going to make the matters even worse. So, we'll see how it goes. America has a long and undignified history of interfering in the domestic political affairs of foreign countries. And it wouldn't surprise me to see that the CIA is busy in Mexico trying to replace its current leader with somebody who's more compliant. And that probably means that we're doing business with drug cartels and things of that nature, because that's what we do. We make allies where we need allies to achieve the result that we want. And so, ironically, at a time when we should be focused on how to weaken the drug cartels, we're probably going to be strengthening the drug cartels to rely upon them to undermine the existing political leadership in Mexico.